if you'll notice, there is a folder called finals, and that's because there's actually 2 finals available. So you have 2 choices on what you want to do for a final assignment in here. So choice A is a coding option. Choice A says you're going to take the code from chapter 9, I believe it is, the blackboard or the blackjack game, but it's got some issues, and so you're going to modify it. And the way you're going to actually modify it is one, you're going to modify it with some different rules. So there is something called Chinese blackjack, and it has some slightly different rules. So you're going to have to be able to change that. There's a lot of the basic structure would stay the same, but how you implement some of the functions would have to change. So you're going to look at the rules for Chinese blackjack. So you have to use multiple decks of cards instead of a single deck, which the original program runs with. And you also need to incorporate some way that if you run out of cards, that it reshuffles. So it takes the card deck that you've used, reshuffles, and redistributes them in case you have that happen. So that's one of the requirements of it. And then blackjack really has another thing that it does, is we bet on blackjack. And so the additional piece we're going to add there is you have to add a betting feature in blackjack. So you've got the game running. You all have those skills. You could do this. I am fairly confident on that. So one of the things that I say is you need to be able to store their winnings or their losses or keep track of it in a file of some sort. I will say that I did some looking, and so 3.7, the latest version of Python, came out somewhere around in March, I believe it was when it came out. And it has broken the pickle function as the way we've defined it. It works, and I figured out what I have to change on my code, but I'm not going to make you guys change that. So saving it just to a text file would be fine for this game. In reality, would you save dollars or values in a text file that you could just edit? Well, no, because that'd be a great way to give yourself $2,500 instead of 25. But for this game, it will work. So you have to have a betting function. And then when I look through the code, one of the things that I see is there's not a lot of error trapping, and it's not very robust. If anything goes wrong, the program just crashes. And that's not what you want to have happen. When you walk into the casino and you're playing on a video game machine and it crashes, are you happy? No. And in fact, they try to avoid that, because one of the big signs you see at every casino is any malfunction in this game will void your winnings. So if they determine there's any kind of an error, so it says, hey, you just won $1 million, but then at the bottom of the screen it says, hey, my program crashed. Are you going to get that $1 million? No. So you want to be as robust as possible. So if you're going to do that, it has to be turned in as a Py file, documented so I see what you're doing, and it has to be done by Wednesday at midnight. All right. Option 2. Option 2 is a test that will be available, and actually I think I'll just go ahead and make it available right now here in just a second. It's originally scheduled to pop open on, I believe it is Monday, but I'm going to change that so it will pop open. And in fact, on this one, because I don't want time to be an issue for you, normally your finals on campus are 2 hours. I've actually given you 3 hours to take this final. There are, I believe, 47 questions on it. There is a coding piece in here, and there are other coding pieces that are multiple choice. So when you take this, you need to have a Python editor available. So do not sit down and take it somewhere where you don't have Python available. You could solve most of it without that, but there actually is one where you actually have to turn in a .py file. You have a small coding example that you need to build in there. When I built the question that I have in there, I actually did it with 12 lines of code, and you can do it with fewer than that, because I was a little verbose. We introduce you to a new function, I show you how to use it, and then you actually have to build a little piece of code around that. So you have to do either A or B. They are both worth 100 points, which is, I think, about 25% of this class. So it can be a make or break for some of you. This one has mostly multiple choice questions on it. That said, there are some that you will need to use your Python editor to double check and see what's going on. You probably know the answer, but it's not a bad idea to check some of those. All right, so they are both due by Wednesday at midnight. Now, there was the question I did have asked, what if I do both of them, can I take the higher score? Well, that's very ambitious, and I appreciate you wanting to do that. And so my first instinct was say no, but the reality is if you want to do both of them, and I will allow you to take the higher score of the two of them if you decide to do that. So that is your final due Wednesday at midnight. So you do not have to come to campus for this final. You can do that all online. So I am going to make this final available right now. Even as we speak, I will do that. And you can take it then anytime you have a chance to do that. I would make sure, one of the things that I also have people sometimes get confused about, unset the timer. Even though it says 3 hours, still didn't take it off there. Even though it says 3 hours, if you step away from the test and log back in later, that clock continues to run. So at that 3 hour mark, you're not going to be able to relog in and work on it. So you need a setting. It should not take you 3 hours, but I did not want time to be an issue for this particular. I don't know why I put those back in there. And in fact, I actually give you 3 hours and 5 minutes just as an extra little cushion on there. I always try to add a few minutes in there. So you will need your toolbox available. So there are questions that come out of the original text, so the programming guide, so you'll need to know things about pseudocode, and then there are Python specific questions in there also. So, in fact, if I were to go in and take this right now, in the random order it's generated, you can see the first 3 questions you're going to see. A blank can contain any number of tasks, but there is no chance to branch off or skip any of the tasks. What is that? Sequence. A blank describes what attributes its objects will have and what those objects will be able to do. A blank input is the statement that reads the first value input into a program. So those are all things we've talked about. So none of those are horrible in terms of what they actually are. So there you get a little sneak preview of what we actually have on the final. So Wednesday, midnight, make sure you do one or the other by then. All right, so let's talk about our game of the day. So leading into this assignment for this week. So if you will look on page 210, we're going to look at this particular game, the Trivia Challenge game. And so this game, instead of having everything written inside of it, you're actually building a framework, and then you're going to access a file that's got solutions to individual problems. So this is far more like what you would actually write a real game. So when Steam creates games, they create a game engine, and then you write a script that actually works within that engine. Well, and that is essentially what you are doing here. And so you are taking a file that looks like this. So you have created a text file, and you can certainly change this text file and create new questions. And so this game goes out and loads this file and says, here is my trivia game. So let's look at the structure really, really quickly on that, because there's a couple of pieces. So on the bottom of page 210, it explains this structure. And so it says, all right, here is the category, on the run with a mammal. Here is the question. And then here are your potential answers. And then it says, my correct answer, which is number 1, and then an explanation of the question. So this text file contains those items. At the very top is a one single line that does not follow that mold, and that is actually the title to the game itself. So you'll pull this, and you're going to run through here one line at a time, pulling information out of there. So you can write new questions in there, and to get them to work in this game, all I need to do is put them in the same format and either add it at the end, add it in the middle. So we can create another question very easy to that. So if I wanted to create a question, I know that the first thing is going to be category. So I'm going to call it programming languages. So my question then is, so there's my question. What is the best programming language? So now I have answer 1. So maybe it's Java, COBOL, Fortran, Python, and then we're going to say my answer is number 4. And my explanation then would be Python rocks. So now I've just changed that just a little bit. So now I've changed that, and so I'm going to run the program as written originally, and then we'll explain pieces of it. So the trivia program, and I'm actually running it right in the DOS window right now. So it says you're going to turn state's evidence, and you need to get on the lam. So, all right, you'll end up on an emu. Got it. The Godfather will get down with you. How would you address him? Well, who's the Godfather of Soul? James Brown. If you paid the mob protection money in rupees, what business would you most likely be insuring? What country has rupees? So let's see if that's correct. Yay! All right. If your mother's father's sister's son was in the family, how are you related to the mob? Not even just gonna guess, because I hate those kinds of questions. So your mother's father's sister is her aunt, and her son is your mother's first cousin, since you and your mother are exactly one generation apart. Her first cousin is your first cousin once removed, or some silly crap. All right. If you were to literally launder your money but didn't want the green in your bills to run, what temperature should you use? What temperature of washing will keep your laundry from all running into like a gray color? Cold. And what is the best programming language? Well, of course, it's Python. So notice we didn't change the program itself, did we? And yet we added that. And then it actually said, hey, your final score is 4. Huh. Well, that's pretty slick. So what I would like to do is then see if we can figure out how we did that and how we could write a program like this. So we're going to look at, let me move this out of the way. So on the middle of page 211, it talks about the very first line in that file, which is our title. So we're going to have to write a couple of pieces. So we're going to break this down into functions. And as we said earlier, everything we've done at this point, we're going to do in functions. So I'm going to create a new file. And this is going to be our trivia challenge. So we need a couple of functions. So one of the weird functions we're going to open is we're going to look at how do I open that file. And we're going to use all those things that we've learned already. So we're going to have that error trapping, so if anything goes wrong, so maybe the file name has changed, this program will actually do something. It'll probably yell at us, but we're going to look at that. So we're going to define open file, and we're going to pass into that then file underscore name and mode. So the two things we need, we're going to pass in there. So we're creating a function that hopefully we can reuse. And we're going to use our friend try, because remember try will not break. It will actually tell us, or we can get information back out if something happens. So we're going to call it the file. And we're going to do an open. And here we pass in that file name and mode. So if we have any kind of an error, we can use an except. And if we have an IO error, so in other words, we take that, we're going to pass it into a variable called E, and we're going to say in the file named. So you actually can parrot that information out. So, and we're actually, in this case, we're going to actually do something, or we're going to actually end the program. So we're actually going to run a new thing called system.exit. And since it's a function, we're going to run this. That forces us to put one more piece in here that we have not used before. So to run sys.exit, we actually have to import another piece into our library. And we have to import sys. We also probably, at some point, you may want to use random. So I tend to have that in about most of mine, just because I like to be able to throw out random numbers if I need to. So the other piece we need in here is going to be an else statement. So an else then, if this works, then this will also run. And so we are going to do a return, and we're going to return the file. So that's our module that says, hey, we're going to open a file. We haven't done anything with it yet. All we're doing is actually opening that file. What would be handy is if we could read this file one line at a time, which is in fact what we're going to do. And so we're going to create another function called next line. And next line, we're going to pass in the file. So that file that's opened, we're going to pass that in. And now we're going to say, this reads one line from text file. So line is equal to the file dot read line. So same thing we saw, that's going to pull one line at a time. So we can do that one. One of the things that we're going to do, Python, like I said, doesn't do word wrap. It's just a text file. It doesn't see all those pieces yet. So we're going to actually replace what Python sees at the end, and we're going to replace it with a new line character. So we've used replace before. We're going to replace the slash character with our new line character. So just a bit of housekeeping in the way that Python deals with. And then we're going to return line. So each time we call this function next line, it goes and reads the next line down in that text file, and it swaps out the slash that you don't see with actually a new line character, and that's kind of a handy touch for us. So the next function we're going to do is called a block function. And our block function is actually going to call reference back to our next line function, but we're going to pull all the pieces for our particular question in one function here. So we're going to get the next block, so define next block. And again, it's going to be the file. It's passed into it. And so if we do the triple quotes, so we identify this one, this grabs all the lines for one block of the game. So by doing this, this is really kind of an interesting way to do it, because we wrote a function above that that said next line. So we know that category is the first thing we're going to run into, and I can use that next line function and I can get a category. Well, because I'm going to use this a lot, I'm going to actually copy and paste this section right there. So the next piece I need, so we get category, if I look back at my text and how it's organized, my next piece is the question. So question equals next line. Starting to see a pattern in here. Now, the next piece, we could do this individually, but it probably makes a lot of sense to use our little for loop. So we're going to create a list. So answers equals a list. Oops, wrong blocks. So we're going to create a list called answers. We don't know what's going to be in there yet until I run a for loop. So for I in range 4, so it's going to give me a set of numbers from 0 to 3. Answers.append, so we're going to add to that blank file we created. And then we're going to call our function next line. So this will actually call that 4 times and read the questions out. Now, honestly, we could have done that individually if we wanted to, but this gives us some flexibility. If I wanted to increase this to 10 questions, I could do that. So it's that idea of scalability. Because I could have done the same thing with 4 lines of answer subscript 0, answer subscript 1, answer subscript 2, and 3. So the next and last piece in there is our explanation. Move that up so you can see it. So our explanation, or how the answer is arrived, again, is that next line. So that's how we go through that entire block of a text file. We're going to return then out of this function, so pass back into whatever called it. We're going to return category, question, answers, correct, and explanation. Oop, I forgot to put in correct, which is under, let's see the order of those. Correct is above explanation. Sorry, I missed one piece here I need to put in. Chunk. So correct equals next line. So we've got these individual pieces. So we've now got how we're going to pull data. So now we're going to need a welcoming or an introduction. So we can do one called welcome, define function, welcome. We're going to pass in title. Remember that very first line of our code, we're going to pass in the name title. So whatever we have put in there is going to come back out. And so we're going to run trivia file is equal to open file. So that runs our first function there called open file. And so we're going to pass in the name of that file. So trivia.txt. And we're going to open it as R, or read only. So that's where we actually call that open file, is in our welcome or introduction function. So title then is equal to our next line. So we reuse that piece over and over again. And then we're going to run hang on a second. I'm putting two pieces in there at once. All right. Let me come back up here for our welcome real quickly. Welcome the player. I'm trying to shortcut. I was trying to shortcut that all into our main function. So all the welcome actually does, hang on a second, is prints welcome to trivia challenge. And it's going to print that title. So print let's play title. All right. I got ahead of myself there trying to create the main function. All right. So the main function then, let me come down here, define main, is where we actually run that first time we open up that trivia file. So we're going to open it up, and we're going to get the title. Then we can actually run the welcome function. And the welcome function, so welcome doesn't need to be set equal to a variable because we're just passing in information. We're not doing anything else. So we open the file, we get the title, and we pass it into welcome, which we run up here. So the next piece, we're going to set a variable here of score equal to 0. And so we can actually create a scoring function right in our main code. Now, we could actually break that scoring down into another function, but I think for now we're going to leave it alone. That might be an improvement you had. So we now need to get our entire block of code. So we're going to say category, question, answers, correct, explanation is equal to our next block, so now we're going to call our next block function. So it's going to come up here, and then it's going to run a set of next lines and work our way down through the game. So that's how we get all the information in for our entire next category. So we have one more thing we want to do. We want to put this in a loop so that we can go through this over and over again. So we're going to create a loop, and we're going to say while category. And that while category then, as long as we pull an item out, so as long as it's not end of file, it's going to run this particular thing. So it's going to print category, and you want to print your question. And then we're going to get our answers. So we could do a print, and we could say answers 0. And you could go through all 4 of those that way. So that would work perfectly fine. But since we know what we can do a very quick little for statement. So for I in range of 4, so this will look very similar to how we pulled them out. We're going to now do a print. And we may want to format those differently. You may want to tab them in. That's fairly common. So we can use that tab. We, though, don't start with 0. So I'm going to print out I plus 1 just so it will say 1 instead of 0. And then I'm going to print out the answers of an index value of I. So remember, whatever answer you get back in, we're going to have to modify it down just a little bit. So here we're going to get an answer. Oh, I got to close that. Hang on. All right, so now we're going to get our answer, or whatever we're going to put in there. So answer equals input. What is your answer? And again, this is another spot we could put this into another function and be very robust, because we'll show you that what will happen. So input of what is your answer? We know that is we know that's going to be a string of some sort. So we can check if this is actually going to be correct. So we could say if answer is equal to correct, that value we pulled out. Remember, what we pulled out of that text file is a string. So we get an input for a string. We don't need to convert it to an integer. Otherwise, we'd have to convert the value we pulled out of the text file to an integer. So if it's equal to correct, print you are right. And then we could do a score equals score plus 1. So in other words, every time they get it right, they get an extra score. Else, we could do something snarky again. Print, you lose. Now at the end of this then, back at this while loop line, I'm going to come back to this, and I'm going to print the explanation then of why they lost. And I'm also going to give them a copy of their score. Score is equal to score comma. And then I just want to push it down to make a line break in between there. Move that down another couple of lines. All right. So the next thing we're going to do then in our file is we've got to go back. This is our priming input. In other words, question 2 or 3 on your final. That's that priming input. So I'm actually going to grab that line, and I'm going to copy it again down here. So now I'm changing my code inside of that loop, and I'm going to get that next block of trivia. So now I have that in there, and I'm a little longer than my file there, or my window, so I want to move that over a little bit. So now I've got, this again goes back and asks, so if this doesn't return anything for category, we're going to fall out of that loop. And if I fall out of that loop, I end up being able to run the next line. So we've said my game is as big as the screen here real quick. So we're going to fall out of that loop if we don't get a category, and we're going to automatically say, all right, well, that's good. We're back out of the outside of that loop. So notice where I'm at. We've fallen out. We're in that next block. So we're going to just call trivia underscore file dot close. So good housekeeping, we're going to close that file. And then we can print your score was all right. So we've got that in there. So now they're going to print your score. And that's all inside that main function. So we need to actually call that main function. And then we can, at the end of that, we can put in our famous little input key to exit. So there's not really a lot to this. It's a set of functions, and your book goes through a pretty good explanation of what you're doing on these. So I'm going to look through here and see what we have going on. So we have a set of functions. So if I trace this in my brain, and I say, all right, the program's going to look at this, and what it's going to run first is it's going to run this line here. It's going to import sys and random, which we didn't end up using yet. And then it's going to come down, skipping all the functions, and it's going to come down here and process main. And main is then going to say, oh, I'm going to run this. That's my main function. And it's going to say trivia file equals open file. So it comes up and runs our open file function. After that is run, it returns it back down here to the next line where it's going to say title equals next line. And so it goes to our text file that's now opened, and it gets that first line of our code. The next line says we're going to run our welcome function. That takes this title that we've just got, passes it up here to this welcome function, and puts it in the title of our game. Our next line is really where we start the heart of this, and so we get all the items. We get category, question, answers, correct, explanation, and we're all getting them out of this next block function, which we created up here, which is really that set of next line functions. So we really, when we call that, we're calling a function which calls a function. So now we run that next block, and it gets all the items from our text file. So it gets all the items from our text file like this, and says, I'm going to grab that entire chunk, and then it allows us to use that and ask that question. And so all we're doing is comparing your answer to whether it's working or not. Once we fall out, we've run every question we had. So only while category exists. So we could break this program kind of in an interesting way. And so let me show you here. If I didn't pay attention to my order of this, and I started typing in the next category is, so I have a line down there that should be a category, but I don't have anything else in there. So let me save this. And I run my program. So I'm just going to quickly put in answers that don't make any sense. Oop, where'd it go? Come back, file. Make that as big as I can so it doesn't blow up the screen. So we know that it's 4, and we know that the best Python language is 4. But notice what happens. It takes that category. So we probably need some extra error checking in there, because that doesn't look very good, does it? And in fact, nothing you do will get a right answer because, there's nothing to it. Now it exits the question. So what might be a better one to actually even look at, instead of doing category, we could actually do this on correct, and let's see the difference and see what happens. So now, it actually worked, and so it made, by changing just that little simple piece, it checked to see if the last line of that was it. So we could do some very robust error checking. We're just setting that up as an example of what you could do. So the correct also works. What you're looking for is any piece of that. Could I set it up where I check for every piece of that to make sure it's there? Sure, I could do that. I don't necessarily need to do that, but it just makes it a little more robust. So I'm going to open up my trivia again, the file. So I'm going to eliminate that one because I don't want to mess up what I've got going on. Yes? This one? So the main is at that outside level. And so that is, if I'm actually looking at lines that run on the mainline code, it's that line and my import sys. The program, that's all it actually runs. All the rest of those are functions. And quite frankly, we could actually set those off on a file on their own if we wanted to. We're not going to quite yet. But, so we have a couple of things we'd like to do with this game to make it a little better. And so if I look at my assignment for this week, my assignment says you're going to take this trivial challenge. So each question has a unique point value, and the player's score should be the total of all the point values of correctly answered questions. All right, so half of your point value is figuring out different values for each question. So how could I do that? What might be a way I could add something different in here to change that, to add different point values? So in other words, some questions we know are harder than others. Is there a way we could embed, maybe even in this text file, could I embed a point value in there some way? Is there a way to do that? Can I alter how I read this text file to pull in a point value for each question? Is that possible? So do we define this block, or is it predefined for us? There's no way to change that. Could we alter that? So that block right now is set up and it says category. How is it good? So it's category, and then it's got the question, it's got answers, it's got a correct, and it's got an explanation. Could we add to that and add point values in there? So how could we do that? What could we change in here to add point values? I can put it in the text value really easily, and I can put it in anywhere in there. I could, before, at the beginning of every question, instead of a category being the first thing, we could put in a point value. Or I could put it at the end. So after the explanation, I'm going to put in a point value in this file. So 5. Maybe this one's worth 10. So after our rupees, maybe that one's 10. Keeping it all in the family. Maybe that question's really hard. It's worth 25 points. This made man's one, blah, 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 blah. If you were to literally launder money, but didn't want it to run, that one we know is pretty easy, maybe a 5 point. And this one is so easy, we're going to put it in after the explanation and put in a point of 1. So I've added a point value as the last item in there. So if I look at my structure, the data file layout, so I've changed that. On page 210, I've added another item. How would I get that back out of that file? Is it going to just magically pull it out for me? So in fact, if I save this file right now, watch what's going to happen. So if I save it, this program's still going to try to run. And the first thing, it's going to be fine. You'll end up on the sheet, but look what happens fairly quickly. So notice all the answers are getting scrambled because it's not reading it incorrectly. So how could I change this, and where could I change that to add an additional piece? So where I get this block of pieces here, is there something I need to add to that one? So I know that this is my last one. Could I have a, you're going to say point or score? Well, we use scores already, so I like point. Point value. Okay. Do I need to do anything else with it? How do I get values in and out of a function? How do I get all the other values out of that function? So it runs and gets that entire block of code. How does it pass that into my main function? Into what? I couldn't hear you. My ears are really super stuffy today from this allergies. So I need to add it to the return. Okay. So I'm going to also return point value. All right. Are we ready to run it? Oh, what else do we need to do? So in main, we're going to have to change something then. So where we call this function, we also need to come in here and put point value. So in other words, that it's going to pull that function in. If I didn't, I'm going to get an error. So now we've got that in there. What can I do with it? So right now we're just adding 1 to every score. Is there something else I could add instead? So what if I just changed this and I said, instead of point value, or 1, I'm going to add point value. So now whatever that point value is we pull in, if it's correct, will get added into that score. So let's see if it works. There's only one way to see, and that's to actually run it and actually see what happens there. So you could also print the point value for that, but we didn't do that yet, so we'll look at that. So I'm going to say you'll end up on the sheep. Oh, we have some kind of value. And it says we've got an error because we're trying to add, essentially, it says an integer and a string. Oh, all right. So we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit. I can't add point value indirectly. Why can I not add it directly? What is every item in a text file stored as? and as a string. So what if I did this then? So I just did integer of point value. And now let's see if we can run that. So we've converted it to an integer. Let's make sure that works. So 1. Uh-oh. So category question answers correct explanation equals next block trivia file. All right. So we need to figure out what we got going on there. So it looks like line 76 is going to be our problem. All right. Or at least somewhere in there. So we're getting closer. So notice we ran through this. Did we put the point value on in here? So we changed it in our priming input. We didn't change it in the input that's actually inside of that while loop. So we can try it again. Let's see. So end up on the sheep. Score 0. Your rupee farm. Your mom's, I don't even remember what that was. We know cold, and we know Python. And it says your final score is 16. Well, if I look at the ones that I answered, that's probably correct. So we can change that data structure. We need to make sure we understand what we've done with it, but we can change that data structure. So now we're putting in that point value right in there. So we could actually change this just a little bit. Print category, print question. I'm going to put a print in between there and print this question is worth point value just so we can share that information with our users. So let's see if that works. So, and it says, hey, this question is worth 5 points. Great. So you can take that data and now you can manipulate that around a little bit. So now you've got half of the problem done at this point. You are able to create and save into this text file that you've modified, trivia text. You're able to save and create that new format. And so you could add additional questions. So we could add another set of questions in here. So we see that we put in where this point is right here, and under 1, it's the last item in there. So there's our new structure. Category. What is the best programming language is our question. 4 potential answers. The correct answer, an explanation, and now a point value on that file. Well, when you're making it, not really. You just have to keep in mind that structure because Python is just reading each line in there. Now, you can see what would happen. So here's an idea. If you want to break these up, let's see what happens if we put in blank spaces in there. Because this is all part of each section, right? So you could break it up into that. And let's see what happens. I don't know. Let's find out what happens and see if it ignores blank spaces. Yep. It is a little tough. That's why you kind of have to follow that formula. So let's see what happens if I try to run this now. So I'm going to go out of this one, close. So that's how we learn, is we experiment and try and see what happens. So I'm going to run it right now. And it says, oh, this question is worth a lamb is just a young sheep points. It reads that next line. It actually does see. What you don't see is the way it puts in essentially an escape character or a slash character. And that's why we have to do one of the lines. We're just making life easier by swapping them. Where we do the replace, that's what we're getting rid of. So yes, this is a little ugly. You can write it that way with spaces and then go in and remove them if you wanted to, if you're going to add new questions. But really, you just have to have that idea. Unfortunately, there's not really a way to say that this is my title. You just have to keep in mind that formatting of that particular thing. So the other thing that let's see what happens if I rename that text file, or it's not in the same place. So if I rename it to Trovia, no, it's open in Python. Hang on a second. I got to close some windows. Chunk. Try again. Let me see if I can. No. Still must have it open. Hang on a second. Close. Close. How many times do I have this thing open? All right. Oh, it's open in that one too. I must have opened it like 30,000 times here. All right. So let me go back in there. Documents. All right. So I'm going to change that file name, and I'm going to call it something different. So it's no longer trivia text. I'm going to rename it to Trovia. So I'm just renaming it to see what's going to happen. So now if I run my function, oh, no such error or no such file or directory. So that's that idea of that sys.exit. It's going to exit out for us. So if it can't find that file, it's going to go, nope, can't see it, can't find it, and I'm going to exit really quickly. So I need to rename that. So you do have to be careful about making sure that the file names are the same, and at least for our case right now, that we're in the same file directory. So when you turn this file in to me, you need to make sure you also turn in your trivia file and your Python file. Because depending on, you could put that anywhere. So you could put those point values anywhere. You could add other information in there if you really wanted to. You could change this to have 5 questions instead of 4, or 4 answers instead of 5. You can do all of that. But I need to have a copy of that in there. So when you turn this in, you need to make sure you submit both files. So the other section that I'm going to leave you on is you need to create a way to keep track of the top 10 scores. So if I were not so clever like I am, I would first go, hey, that sounds familiar. I think we've done some high scores and things out of the book, and we've done some in class. I would probably go look for those to see if I have some ideas very quickly about how to do that. And then I would add that at the bottom of my main program probably. So, hey, you got a score of 137. Please enter your name. You're the top 10 score or whatever it is. So we've done some of that already. So I think you should be able to figure out a clever method to score some top 10 list of who has the highest scores. So you can probably clean this up the way we did a little better. So this is one way to do that, is adding it in that way. You can literally create it in any way. If it makes more sense to put it in another location in there, you can do that. You just need to make sure that where you're retrieving it from is in the right location. Otherwise, you're going to retrieve an answer when you wanted to get a category or something else. So looking at those blocks and how we pull those blocks in, so if you wanted to put that in, so instead of putting it below the explanation as the last item, you wanted to do that right underneath the category, you could do that. However, you need to make sure your text file and your block structure here match. The other thing you would have to do is there is nothing that says these have a name associated with it. There's nothing that says, so you would have to make sure these are in the correct order based on what you have listed here. It's only through executing them in that order do we get them that way, because it's going to pass back exactly what it finds on that next line. And so if that's not correct, then you're going to get something different. So you can account for, if you want to get really ambitious and you'd like to break up that text file, you could put a next line function where if that line is blank, then you go back and grab another line. You could do that if you really wanted to. I probably wouldn't for this. For 10 questions or whatever you're going to put in there, I think you can handle that data structure. All right, any questions off the top? So everybody should get at least half credit before they leave here. At least. So now you just need to come up with a high score function to go along with this particular function. Remember where you can get this. You don't need to recreate all this. So I would actually start with this program that's called Trivia Challenge that is inside of your source code. So we ran through it really quickly creating it here, but you can certainly start with it in this particular area. All right, remember you have that final is due. I will send out some email and some announcements and some yelling and make sure that everybody gets done with that. But that is a fairly significant chunk of points in this particular class. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great last day of school. Hopefully this is your last class of the day for some of you. Or first class.